Hi, it's Claire Wasserman, and welcome to my podcast, a behind the scenes look at what it really takes to own our worth and reach our goals. I coach real women on how to get what they want at work and in life, as well as a window into my own process as I too figure this stuff out, because it's hard. And so thank you for being here. It's nice to know we're not alone. This is the third episode in a six-part series where the tables have turned and I'm the one being coached. My guide is Brittany Tam, who specializes in helping business owners rebuild their relationships with money so that they can move from surviving to thriving. I'm in the midst of revamping my entire business model, and in doing so, a lot of money issues have come up for me. In this episode, we explore how an experience in the third grade made me decide that I was, quote, bad at math, and how that's continued to impact me and my bank account today. I also share a story towards the end of how feeling a chip on my shoulder around not being wealthy growing up may have been a subconscious blocker to making more. This episode works as a standalone, but I encourage you to check out the first two to get a better sense of where my business is at and the money journey I'm taking you and myself on. Okay, let's dive in.
So one of the things that we were talking about is income can support you so far. And also you have to figure out what you're doing with spending and what you're doing with the management. And I know last week you mentioned opening up the bank account and feeling, oh, your face just did a thing.
Yeah.
And feeling not great about it. So did you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. I imagine when I start making money or more money and this business model is working, I'll feel more excited about checking my bank statement. But I don't want to wait till that happens. I want to feel good now, regardless of how little is in there. And so knowing that even just physically, I have an aversion to going into the numbers in any way. I'm like, can we talk about ideas instead? Can we talk about impact? Talk about inspiration? Oh, numbers starts to like make me feel a bit freaked out. And so I'd love to figure out how to get into a better space with it now when I don't have as much in my account as I'd like.
Yeah, I'd love to. So you talked about an aversion physically, use the phrase freaked out. If you were going to feeling words to it, do you have feeling words?
Ooh, I feel nauseous. Is that what you're looking for?
Nauseous is a great sensation to
Uh-huh.
take note of. I don't know if it tells us so much about the emotion that's behind it.
Okay, that's a good clarifier. I feel anxious. And if I were to be more specific about the anxiety, the it feels like a massive quicksand, like a I'm or vortex. If I start to look at my numbers, all of a sudden there's this tsunami wave of lots of other thoughts and feelings that come up. Like even just the thought of where are all of my materials? Like where are all the bank accounts I have opened up? Like where are all they? There's a disorganization. There's just so much to tackle when starting to look at my numbers, or at least it feels like it's just so much. So yeah, anxiety, overwhelm would be the feeling.
I was just going to say it sounds like overwhelms there
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
If you were like, what would the overwhelm, if the overwhelm was trying to tell you something, if it was trying to let you know something, what would it be telling you?
Two things. I'll tell you the constructive thing it would tell me, and then the less constructive thing. So the constructive thing would be you need to get a handle on where all of your accounts are. Like where I know you've got a Fidelity account, like understanding what that's all about. Can you even take that money out? Like the purpose of all of your accounts and where they are. I've got some crypto money that I think I can recover and turn into cash. Like getting organized. That's the constructive thought. And then the less constructive thought is you are such not an adult. Like the fact that it's just total judgment on the fact that I am a little confused about where everything is. And then the added judgment of how the F could you run an organization called Ladies Get Paid when you espouse financial proactiveness. That being said, I've been very clear with people. I think that I started Ladies Get Paid because I needed Ladies Get Paid, and my specialty is self advocating, not necessarily organizing my finances. That I am certainly on a journey, but I'm almost 38 years old. Like, how embarrassing. So, taking action on the constructive thought becomes harder when there's the inner critic that's very loud.
Absolutely. And that makes sense. And also, the thought that comes in is even if you knew where all the accounts were, even if you had the purpose and the where, you've got that other layer of anxiety. And just because you have the structure doesn't mean that you're going to engage with it if that anxiety is so high, right?
Yeah, because the minute I start to figure out where all my accounts are, instead of feeling like, good job, you're working on it, I'm feeling like, I can't believe you even have to do this. You're such an idiot.
So then if we talk about the anxiety, what would the anxiety want you to know? Or what is the anxiety saying?
I think I may have talked about this in our first session, or maybe I mentioned it before we started working together. I've always had a lot of fear around math, stemming from a third grade experience of where I was called to the board to do multiplication tables, didn't know how to do it, and everybody laughed. Although when I revisited that memory, I realized, oh, maybe a lot of people were feeling the same way I did. And I just focused on maybe it was two kids who were laughing, right? I hear you, Nikki Simmons. So I feel anxious when I'm looking at numbers and I immediately start to feel like I can't do this. There's like a gut reaction, still very much felt physically, that I'm lost. Ah, the numbers are swimming ahead in front of me. What do they all mean?
Is it, is there anything else that comes up as well? Because that's number fear, I feel, is a big thing.
Again,
Well,
just judgment, right? So am I spending things I shouldn't be spending, quote, shouldn't be spending, right? Not make the money I want to be making. Like I think I've done a pretty good job of I have an action plan for how to rectify these things. But in times past, for sure, I had out of control spending at moments. I'd gotten into credit card debt. So historically, I've self-judged when looking at numbers, right? The choices I made or didn't make.
how do you feel about spending some time with the math years?
Sure, whatever.
Yeah. So I feel like this is where, I don't know if you know this, but in a previous life, I was like a math instruction specialist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the way that we got taught math was like just not the most constructive way. We got shamed for stuff like using our fingers, and we got shamed for using concrete materials when that is absolutely how we learn.
Mm.
And I feel like knowing that is one thing, but also it sounds like there is a visceral reaction for you when you think about the fear around the numbers.
By the way, I have a long history of struggles with math, and it's not just in third grade. It was SAT. I scored almost perfect in verbal and then really low in math.
Hmm.
I failed my statistics exam 3 times. Actually, it was because I showed up to the exam and then walked out. So maybe it was more about fear of failure that then led to the failure. I've also had some experiences where in class or in a test, like I would come up with the number and it would be right, and then I wouldn't say it, or I would second guess myself. Like I knew more than I actually gave myself opportunity to express, which I think is pretty common for girls. But it's been this consistent narrative that then got compounded by this is so gendered, but I've got twin brothers who are phenomenal at math. My mom would say, yeah, when they were younger, you were interested in playing paper dolls and they wanted to build Legos and math. We really fell into gender stereotypes. And then our innate characters got sort of nurtured in certain directions. And I really fell into that stereotype of girls don't do math, not blaming anyone, but it's been many years, not just third grade. So I feel like it's worth bringing.
Yeah. And I think that what you're talking about speaks to the whole cultural component of the beliefs that we hold, where it's not just us, it's not just our experiences, but like culture shapes it, right? And when you're talking math, when you were talking about like SATs and statistics, there's a complexity around that math. Do you see that math in the numbers that you have to deal with for managing your money?
I don't even deal. That's the thing. I literally don't look at anything.
Mm,
I'm lucky, I should say. We have an accountant. Okay. So we pay our taxes. We have an accountant. Whenever I land a gig, an invoice is sent, I don't deal with any of it. And I just don't spend very much money now. I really
mhm,
live well below our means. So I don't even check my bank statement because I know that I've curbed all of my shopaholic tendencies. As we hopefully start to make lots of money and then make larger purchases, I need to be more involved. So not making that much and not spending that much allowed me to be avoidant, which is now compounding. It's not allowing me to grow in the way I want to grow. So it's why I'm
mhm.
ready to make change.
What I'm wondering then is if this is something that you want to shift. I think I've got some ideas of something we can do now, but also there is what we do in this container, and there's also the rest of your life too. What would you want to do, say, over the next week to work through some of this stuff or to explore some of this
Yeah,
stuff?
I think actually looking at the numbers. So I don't know if this is like, all right, every day you have to look at your bank account or whatever. You tell me what's best. But I think I put it on a pedestal in a way and made it scarier for myself because I'm not actually looking at it. And if I experienced it more regularly, it's just a normal thing. So I think there's an exposure therapy aspect to this, right? Where I'm just literally looking at them. And then I imagine there's probably a way to see them tell a happy story instead of exist as a reminder for bad choices, right? I guess some mindset shifts and then exposure. This is where I'm so thrilled to be working with you because I'm not quite sure what to do other than I know I have to do something.
Yeah, and looking at the numbers is something that I think is really valuable. And also there's exposure therapy, but if your body is still like ramping up
Mhm.
in terms of that nervous system response, it might not be as constructive. So I'm wondering what you can do to help your body remember that it's safe
Uh-huh.
as you're doing this kind of opening up the bank accounts. Yeah, what would help your body feel safe in that
Yeah.
process?
That's a good question. I'm imagining myself doing this.
Hmm.
And the first thing that came to mind was, I feel so proud of myself. Like, yay, look at me doing a hard thing. I don't know if there's something I can do to remind myself that I'm proud of myself beforehand or get into a state of being where I'm bringing that pride with me. I think it's hard when we just counsel ourselves and we just talk to ourselves because emotional and rational brains aren't always on the same page. So I like rationally could be saying, Claire, I'm proud of you, but not feel it. So I wonder what I can do in a more like somatic sense or a visualization that would get me into that self pride. So I don't do you have any suggestions for how to do that? I'm going in the direction of this is an opportunity to feel really proud of myself.
Yeah, I think so one of the things that I like to suggest on a money date is exactly what you're talking about, where you have a bit of like mindfulness at the beginning, where you're touching in with yourself, you're touching in with the intentions, the why you're doing this, because the why goes beyond just looking at the numbers. The why is, what would your why be?
My family, right? I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for myself so that I can overcome a fear that I've had and rewrite a narrative that is so detrimental, not just to me, but to so many girls about can't do math, we can't do numbers, that I'm embarrassed I've fallen into. So this is an opportunity to reclaim and rewrite that narrative. It's exciting.
Yeah. And so what would it feel like to say have that written down and have that as a reference that you use before you actually go in and look at the bank accounts?
Yeah. In the past, I've used things like anger against the wage gap or frustration with how men have like treated me in my career and being underestimated, etc. And so part of me is also screw Nikki Simmons for laughing at me at in third grade. But I actually want to stay away from that because
Mm.
that sort of energy can burn me out. If I'm harnessing or stoking this like anger part,
Yeah.
certainly brings the passion. I get the follow through, but then I get tired from that versus a kinder kind of energy. So part of me wanted to just write in a sticky note like F Nikki Simmons, and then that would motivate me. But I think that was sort of me in the past. And now I need a bit of a different motivator. But yeah, I like what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so having some reminders, and then you talked about a somatic process. Um, I know that last time we were talking, you talked about a visualization exercise that you like to do, um, imagining yourself as a tree. Do you feel like that is something for beginning of the session, or is that something for to keep in your back pocket for if your shoulders start to tense up and your chest starts to contract?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good one because it's planting my feet in the ground, right? It's growing roots. We talked about, I think you said safety before, like how do we feel safe? My mind is spiraling. How do we ground it physically? Imagining myself being planted in the ground can help. Actually, I just thought of another thing that I think would be helpful for me here is these numbers, it's all made up. Capitalism is made up. It's a system that we in America and many other countries use. Other countries don't use it. It's literally just men in a room decided that this was how we were going to function as a society. It's real, it's necessary, but it's also like, it's not the meaning of life. It's not the real stuff of life, which is to me connection and love. And to me, energy is more real, quote, real than money. It's just a game we have to play. And I've been too afraid to learn the rules, or I've been too pissed off that I have to even learn rules or whatever, all the resistance I've had for it. If I think I can remember, this will help keep things in perspective. It's a game that people learn how to play, and anyone can learn it. This is not like the most fundamentals of life, which
Mm,
is, to be honest, I've gone through way harder things, right? With my son's health needs. My son almost died. Me looking at numbers, I think I'm confusing fears. I'm seeing the numbers and fearful about that in the same way I've been fearful about other things. They're not the same. So being able to separate these things out, my son and his health, that was real. This, it affects our lives, of course, money
hmm
necessary, but it's also a made up system. It's not body, it's not flesh.
And money is never the end goal, like really,
Right.
right? When we're talking about money, there's something that it allows us to feel or do that we're not able to feel or do now,
Mhm.
maybe.
Yeah.
And even that is that actually true? If you're like, money allows us for security, is it true that you don't have access to security right now?
No, I do. I love that you said maybe because I find that a lot with people that I coach. We talk about all these things they want or they're waiting for, and they don't realize that they actually have a lot of it right now. And if they just spend more energy and attention on it and stoked it, they would feel more in command of their lives, right?
Mhm. Going back to actually looking at the numbers and thinking about what you need to engage with it, are there other things that your body needs to feel safe? For example, one of the things that I find can sometimes help me is hopping into either a co-working session or going to a cafe where I see a whole bunch of people who are not stressed.
Right.
And that helps me remember that I'm not actually facing down a lion right now. Is there something else that would help you feel super grounded as you're going through this process?
Yeah, I think doing this with my wife would be good. I think making this an experience together where it doesn't mean we necessarily are looking at the computer at the same time, but once a week for X period of time, she's doing her thing and I'm doing the numbers, but we're in the space together because I feel safer with her.
Awesome. How would it feel to do it more than once a week at the beginning,
Hmm.
just to nurture that sense of it is safe
Mhm.
to be here with my numbers?
Mhm. Yeah. Again, I just start to think, oh my gosh, where are my numbers? There's all this pre-work I need to do to even figure out this stuff. But
Maybe
I'll go
that,
to Ashley. I'll ask my wife, I'll say, this is what I'm going through. The goal is to look at the numbers every day. I'm having a hard time getting started because I don't know where things are. Can you help me with that?
And I wonder if that is also part of that first couple of days of this. Maybe the first day is just collecting all of that information.
Yeah.
How does it feel to do that?
Immediately think I have so much other things I have to do. How is this really that on my list of priorities? It's always something that I tend to put on the back burner, right?
Do you need a permission slip to say, hey, carve out 15 minutes and if, or 5 minutes even?
Hmm.
And would that help?
Yeah, yeah. This again is what I tell other people, right? It's if we're intimidated to do something, it's usually because we're thinking of it in way too big.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I did after one of our sessions, I did reach out to our accountant and I said, hey, could you send me an invoice every month? Or not an invoice, a balance. So where are we at? Um,
Mhm.
I did start that. Yeah, I need to just, even if it's finding out where all the accounts are, if that feels too big, it's I got to break it down into something smaller then.
Do you want to do that right now?
I do think the next step is to talk to Ashley because she's been the numbers person. She's been in charge of the whole business side, and I'm like front of house. She's back of house, or I joke, I'm front of house, but she's the whole house. Now she's primary parenting, and I'm alone with our accountant. I think I need to go to her, and she will tell me, here's all the things. And then from there, I will figure out what is realistic for me to do, what pushes me out of my comfort zone, but is still achievable.
And that you can nurture that sense of safety in, right? When you think about this whole process right now, what sensations do you have in your body?
And I'm not breathing deeply enough. Like, gosh, okay, just well, because I'm also worried when sharing this with everybody that they will be disappointed in me that I've led Ladies Get Paid and I've struggled this much with looking at numbers. I just want to underscore very different skill set to advocate for yourself, aka go and pitch yourself for things and negotiate big numbers than it is to continually look at the numbers and be business minded. Like they're just starting a business is very different from growing a business. So I want to justify that I have amazing skill sets in certain aspects of money and then I have deficits in others. So part of me right now is let go of the judgment that other people may have on you, slash the judgment I, of course, have of myself. No, I feel excited that the good news about not being great at something is you can watch yourself improve. There's only one way to go, and it's up.
I'm curious with that, worried that the people will be disappointed in me. What have you seen that reinforces that? And what have you seen that counters that?
Ashley has said, be careful. She was nervous about me doing this because you have a certain image around money that, yeah, but we talked it through and it was like, I am again awesome at asking for money and negotiating and it's for brands and sponsors and speaking gigs, right? So it's not that I'm not good at the things that I talk about, but she did have a moment of pause with me. No one's ever negatively commented, if that's what you mean. So I haven't seen like evidence from anyone. I don't know what they're thinking, of course. No, I've only gotten lovely responses of this is so brave and me too. I feel the same way. And it's nice to know I'm not alone and all of those things. I mean, that is truly why I do this kind of work, both me expressing what I'm going through and also recording sessions where I coach people, because when you see yourself in another and realize that you're not alone, it helps to dissolve that shame that we add to the narrative of whatever it is that we're going through, making it that much
Mhm.
harder to work through it. So even if I am judged, my purpose for doing this is stronger than my fear of the judgment.
You mentioned before we hopped on too that you have these stories that you carry with you in the past. And I'm wondering what correlation with kind of what we've been talking about today.
When I look at sort of money memories from the past, you mean?
Yeah, and they might not be just money memories, right? It's often they're like often when we peel back the layers, it's not just the money memory, it's life in general, our experience with parents, our experience with peers, our experience with society. Does any one of those feel really resonant right now? Does any one of those feel like it needs some love and attention?
Yeah, and I think that could be really good for the next session as well. So I'll share something that I've been wondering if it's holding me back subconsciously. And then we could do a little talking about it and then maybe dig in further in our fourth session. My entire life, I was in very privileged environments, but was always the kid who had the least amount of money. I went to private school, I went to sleepaway camp. The girls in my bunk had designer clothes. I'd be invited over for birthday parties that were extravagant in mansions. And in my family, my great grandfather grew up extremely poor, but then became very wealthy. He's a self made person. And then his son, my grandfather, became a well known architect and also became quite wealthy. That's really the only wealth in the family. My mom works in opera. She's retired now, but she's in the arts, and my dad works in publishing. Both of them got to the top of their fields, but these were not highly lucrative. So there was a lot of intellectual privilege and then like family privilege, but our day to day, we were not living in mansions here. I was not having the designer clothes. We never wanted for anything. So it's all perspective, of course. The reason I bring this up is my entire life, I think I felt a little bit of, I don't know if it's a chip on my shoulder, but I felt like an outsider. Also, like the girls I went to high school with, in my memory, it's probably not true, but like in my memory, they were all these thin, blonde Christian girls. And I was like really hairy and Jewish and I felt chubby. It doesn't matter what the reality was, it's the perception. And my self perception was that I was ugly. And also, I was bullied and told I was ugly. So there was that too. But I felt othered. And it's interesting. My best friends have always been people who were adopted. I just didn't feel like everyone else. Maybe it's not a surprise that I turned out to be gay. Anywho, and in that kind of financial othering, I felt like I had to work really hard to be awesome. I couldn't just show up wearing the luxury brand. So I had to be funny and entertaining. And the reason I bring this up and wonder if it's blocking me from becoming wealthy myself is it's been my identity, right? So to make change means to potentially transform, right? To no longer be who I was. And there's probably comfort in that identity. I'll just share a quick story that comes to mind that underscores how present this actually is, even though it's been subconscious. I think it's been more present than I realized. I was invited to a very high society wedding a couple of years ago, and I wore a $15 dress from Calvin Klein that I had found in a vintage store. And I walked into this party and I felt really beautiful, but I also felt a little bit smug and a little bit superior because I thought, oh, these other people, they've spent all this money on their outfits and I only spent $15 and I looked better. So there's this sort of superiority complex too here with the chip on the shoulder. And I go to the bathroom and I get water on my dress. And I'm like, oh gosh, it has this like water stain. There was a blow dryer also in the bathroom. So I went to blow dry the stain and I burned a hole in the dress. And
Mhm.
I freaked out, crying hysterically. My wife, Ashley, was like, you need to go to therapy ASAP. Like, I understand being upset that you've just burned a hole in your dress, but the level of meltdown that happened, it surprised even me. And something that I apparently said in my meltdown was, this is all I have. This is all I have. And I think what I was saying by this is all I have was the projection that I fit in. I felt like that hole that got burnt in my dress exposed me for what I actually was, which was didn't have much money. And I've been able to get around it by being interesting, smart, charming, doing things, constantly doing things. And again, that was only a few years ago, right? So we can look in the past of, oh, I was envious of the girls at camp, but I think I've carried it with me. And it's not something I've ever explored in therapy. I never felt like I needed to. But in our work now, I'm realizing there are these things deep inside that may be getting in the way of putting my foot on the gas pedal for my business. because what if I make a lot of money? We often talk about the fear of failure, but I think it's worth talking about the fear of success. What if I financially succeed? That is a very different identity, perhaps, than this girl with the burnt hole in her dress. So I don't know if we want to keep going and talking about that today or use this as a cliffhanger for next session, but I wrote that down as I came into our time here today because it felt important.
The fear of success is a real thing. Like it absolutely is. And I guess alongside that, there is a fear that comes in when your bank balance goes above a number that you're necessarily comfortable with. And this is something that I see a lot where people are making like double the revenue that they have before, and their bank balance is still identical, and they're still having the same troubles making sure everything's being paid. I feel like I wonder if we can holster that for now,
Mhm.
save it for next week, and focus on, I hate the term exposure therapy because exposure therapy makes me, my experience of exposure therapy is it's really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It's not joyful,
Right.
and I don't feel safe.
No, I agree. I'm not a fan of because then you'll continue to associate this thing with something negative, with a negative feeling, and what we
Yeah.
should do the exact opposite.
What would you like to call it that is not exposure therapy?
Practice. I tend to lean towards when I look at everything I do as practice or an experiment, it takes the pressure off.
Does practice make you go, hell yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
But I'm getting better, right? That I'm practicing. It is a practice to do it, but I am also practice. It's funny because I played violin growing up and I hated practicing. So maybe not,
Yeah.
I've retaken that one back.
But I'm wondering if there's something that connects to the why you're doing it.
I want to say I'm
Okay.
practicing looking at the numbers. It's almost like I'm not even looking at the numbers. I'm just practicing looking at the numbers. That I
Okay.
feel so much better when I think about it that way.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Because there's no
Um,
judgment there. There's literally no judgment.
yeah. Okay, let's focus on practice for this week then.
Okay. Cool.